All right, we are back for the long-awaited, long-anticipated episode 3 of Science of the Cat. No, Science of the Strike. Science of
There
the
it is.
Strike.
There it is.
So today we are talking about barometric pressure and the effects, if any, of moon phase.
Right.
Uh, Lot of talk around both of those things in the industry. Personally, I think it's unclear as to whether or not either of those things actually matter, and so hopefully we'll be able to shed some light onto whether or not they really do or don't. So Sam's going to take us away with moon phase to get things started.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about lunar cycles, moon phase, the different stages of the moon, and how it affects fish movement, fish depth, that kind of things. See what I could find. First, I'd like to start. There's very limited information on how the moon affects bass. There is a lot more information on how it affects like salmon and cisco and things of that nature. So more of your your cisco can be in the ocean, your salmon are a little more
Sure,
streams or
sure.
tidal water fisheries. So there was one good study done on moon phase and bass, and it was done from Ottawa Carleton Institute of Biology and Fish Ecology and Conservation Physiology Laboratory. And that was done in Ontario, Canada. So, well, that's where the school is from. They don't specify what lake this came from, but I assume it has to be more of a southern states lake because of the time frames that they were doing this study, with it being in January and February and March and those types of months. All their lakes up there are frozen at that point.
Sure.
So I'm assuming this comes from more of a southern lake for statistics wise, if that matters. So diving into this research article, we looked at kind of how they did it, study design, to see if it was well designed study. They used something called acoustic telemetry, which I think is very important to show that the study was done well, because there are many different ways you can try to track this moon phase. As you know, Corbin and I have been out fishing. We'll track on our watches and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, hey, we caught this fish. You'll mark it, and it'll tell you like what the moon phase is now
Sure.
at this time, right? But to really be precise and to have a widespread amount of data over like all lunar cycles, they have to be able to track the fish at all times.
Sure. Okay.
So that's something that's very hard to do unless you do what they did here, and that's
Put a tracker in them.
put a tracker in
Okay.
them that sends out a signal that if they have things that close enough to them in the water can accept their signal back, they can know where they are, depth of water, how far they've
Okay.
moved, and things like that.
Okay.
So this is the number one way for tracking bass in all studies that we've kind of looked at
Sure.
so far. That if they're not doing it this way, it's very difficult for them to be doing it well.
Sure.
Because you can go out and catch fish, or you can go out and get the fish when they come up shallow. You can like visually see them, take notes, stuff like that. But if you don't know exactly where they're going at all times, I think it can be very challenging to make
Absolutely.
a great study out of it. So the way they did, they looked at these bass over multiple lunar cycles, and which allowed for identification of patterns and trends within
Uh-huh.
each individual
Uh-huh.
lunar cycle. Each lunar cycle is about 28 to 30 days.
Okay.
So
That's from like new moon to full moon.
right.
Okay.
Long drawn out study, right? The moon going through all the waning phases, all the waxing phases,
Sure.
full and new moon. Takes quite a while to go over this. And they went over multiple lunar cycles, so I think they did that well too. They had a large range
Okay.
of time
Sure.
and data.
Yeah, not just one cycle,
Right.
multiple cycles.
Right.
Yeah.
The researchers also accounted for environmental factors, and they weren't super specific on how they did this, but they did say that they took into account water temperature, which obviously is
Yeah.
the most important for fish
Absolutely.
movement. As
Absolutely.
you can tell, we're in the winter and water's 40 degrees here in Missouri, and bass are moving very slow and very hard to catch.
Yeah.
At a lot of points.
Yeah.
So they did take that into their mathematical equation of how they use their data, filtering out the water temperature
Sure.
as best they could. Now they made it very clear that during the summer months where they were tracking, fish moved more. They attributed a
Of
lot of that to
course.
water temperature.
Anywhere else
And
it's going to
then
happen.
winter,
Yeah.
they attributed not moving as much to a lot of that to being water temperature, but they tried to statistically take
Eliminate.
that out to
Right.
where they can
Right.
just look at the lunar cycles. Now, that's not accounting for, how other bait fish are moving, what forage is in the area, how they're eating, where they're living, all these different things. So that is the hardest part, is separating one single environmental factor from the rest in a lake like that. You can't.
There's so many variables.
You truly can't. So take, the effects of moon phase and pressure and all these different things we're going to talk about, with a grain of salt, to be like, there may
100%.
there may be a difference with these, and they can make a difference, and they can make a difference in different scenarios, but it's, there's so many factors that go into why a fish is moving and why a fish is being at the depth they're at.
Yes.
I don't think you can truly ever pin it
Eliminate.
on one thing.
Yeah. I think
Okay.
that's probably why both of these topics have so much of this, shoulder shrugging around it. Like,
Right.
some guys think it's just diehard truth, and some guys, say, I don't know.
Right.
And I think that's because, unlike experiments like scent or vision, you can't really, I feel like it'd be hard to test moon cycle or pressure from a tank.
Right. It's almost impossible.
You have to be out in the wild,
Right.
to really.
They said I did read one side, they tried to do that with salmon, and
In a tank?
they claimed, that salmon could still feel the gravitational pull from the moon in those tanks, but to what extent, how much of that is similar, to how they're moving depth-wise, how far they're moving, you can't test that in a tank.
So let me ask you this.
I don't know how they quantified if they felt the pressure, but from one of the studies, looking at the discussion and everything, that's what they kind of came up with.
So this might be a really dumb question, and maybe you did or did not research this, but just from a very general point of view, what is it that the moon is impacting for the fish? Is it that, like tides, the fish could feel a gravitational pull in the water, or is it a lighting thing, or maybe it's a combination of both? Maybe, I don't know if that was clear from what you researched.
It wasn't super clear. They did say that the gravitational pull is the biggest effect, because that affects the tides.
Right.
And the movement of the water, the pressure that that you're probably going to talk about a little bit, that puts on these fish, is what they think is moving these fish.
Okay.
They did say, I did read this somewhere, and I can't remember the exact numbers, so don't quote me on this, but the moon at its closest point and its farthest point is tens of thousands miles difference.
It's a significant. Okay.
As close it is to the Earth.
Right.
So it's significant change through these lunar cycles, how far and how close the moon is, and that's why the tidal water fisheries move so much water.
Yeah.
At any given time when the tides are in and tides are out.
The water is pulled towards the moon. That's literally, there's a bulge. The water in the ocean bulges towards the moon, which is wild.
So the effects of that on our lakes,
it's got to be minimal.
Aren't oceans?
It's got to be minimal.
You got to think you don't ever see a tide change in a lake around Missouri
or anywhere.
I mean, very little river, tidal systems, as you can find those in the United States, but much different than being obviously on a big ocean.
For sure.
So, okay, so back to the study here. Specifically, they observed bass depth distribution and activity levels and how they varied in relation to these lunar phases. Okay. So, just the most important statistics, right off the bat, kind of what the study found, and we'll talk about those a little bit, is that they found that in the spring and summer months, the bass tend to inhabit deeper depths during a waxing moon phase. That's the moon getting to a full moon. Okay, not
deeper
coming down.
During waxing phases.
Waxing phases. Okay, in the spring and summer months. So,
wow.
How precise is that, and how much can you extrapolate that, over all of your moon phases when you're fishing can be, a little bit wishy-washy, sure. I say, for me to be able to really say, okay, waxing moon phase, bass may be a little deeper. Okay, but that is what this study found over doing it over multiple months, multiple lunar cycles.
Wow.
Right? This was the only set of data that they could extrapolate out.
Oh, really? Okay. A
Right,
significant correlation.
right. Had a
Wow.
significant difference. Is kind
Okay.
of what they did the standard deviation there.
Well, that's kind of good to know for like summer fishing. I
Sure,
mean,
if you want to plan to, you
like,
believe the moon
hey,
phase a little
like,
bit. Hey,
or
it's
if you're nighttime fishing, maybe. I
right,
don't know.
right, right. Um, so also they mentioned, movement distances are much greater in the warmer months. I believe that contributes a lot to the water temperature.
Yep.
And they said that even though the effects of the lunar cycles, were not consistent throughout the year, they think that you should put more emphasis on water temperature and things like that.
Well, sure.
So they
Sure.
made that very clear in their study that they did, that this can be minimal, but this can maybe have an effect.
Sure.
Um, some important stats, I would say, fish daily movement that they found tracking these fish. This doesn't necessarily correlate to the moon phase or anything, but with their trackers, they put some other interesting data in here that I wanted to mention. Is that daily movement distances were 5 times greater during the spring and summer than the winter.
It doesn't surprise me. I doubt that that's moon correlated, but
Right.
just temperature.
5 times more likely though that if you find them in the winter, you're likely to have that group or that spot
Something to think about.
for a long
Yeah.
time. Spring and
Something.
summer, you could go pull up on a
Oh,
pile
they're
and find
moving.
them, and then tomorrow you
They're
show back
gone.
up for the tournament, they're not there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's play a little bit here. So here is the stats exactly from the spring and summer months that they found the movement on
Okay.
them. The daily distribution followed a pattern in which fish inhabited greater depths on the 26 through 50% and 51 through 75% waxing moon phase.
All right. Break that down for us.
So that's talking about when the moon is growing to the full moon,
Right.
right? That first quarter of that moon growing,
Yep.
they couldn't find any correlation. That next quarter, 25 to 50%, they found a good correlation of fish inhabiting those deeper depths.
Okay.
And then from 51 to 75,
Yeah.
that next stage, they also found them inhabiting deeper depths.
Okay.
Okay, so that middle moon phase, as the moon is growing, right?
Things pretty much pick up.
Things pick up and fish go a little deeper,
Go deeper.
to feed or whatever may be drawing them down there, the pressure pulling them down there. Okay, so during autumn and winter months, fish were twice as deep and 3 times less active than the summer and spring months, is what they kind of said as well. The correlation between the lunar phase and bass depth was repeated between the 4th and 6th lunar cycles, and nearly significant between the 4th and 5th lunar cycles and 5th and 6th lunar cycles. So that's where they got most of their information. That was starting to get later on in the year, the spring and summer months,
Right.
obviously March, May, June,
Right.
that area is when they got a lot of this data. So take that into consideration too. This data is coming from that springtime much more than it is the summertime active time. So they made sure to mention, however, the current study, did demonstrate that was a repeatable pattern in depth and use in the spring and summer months. That this data, should be taken lightly.
Okay.
That when you're looking at these moon phases and how it can affect fish, I don't think there's truly any great data out there that points to we should be focusing on this more than water temperature or time of year patterns.
Sure.
Right. Compared to moon phase. I think it is something, you hear all the time the moon gets the spawn kicked off.
Right.
And I find that so interesting that there's nothing in here that pointed to that. They even pointed to the spring and summer months, them going deeper.
Not shallower.
Right? Not pushing up shallow
as the full moon grew closer.
As the full moon's growing closer. Right? So I think that's interesting.
So interesting. I wonder if that's a lighting thing.
I think there is something
because they're visual predators.
Into that. They're definitely visual predators.
And so
they're more active at night, in the brighter moon phases.
Definitely.
We talked about that in the last one with depth and how that affects everything.
Yep.
I think that could be some play of why they might be moving up shallow. But it's not because of pressure from the moon or the moon phase they're in. It's more of just pure lighting at that point. I think that could be playing into a lot of that.
To me, like I'm trying to think of like, okay, well, how does this impact our fishing or people who are listening? How does it impact their fishing? And in my mind, one of the biggest ways I feel like is in those early morning days when you start before the sun is up, depending upon what the moon was the night before your morning, might impact where you start. Sure. So if it is in one of those
Yeah.
50 to 75%
Yeah.
waxing phases, then you might say, hey, I'm going to fish a little deeper than what I might otherwise start off at. I don't
Sure.
know. Maybe
Sure.
that's just the way I'm thinking of it.
There's definitely probably something to that, and especially if you have one of those brighter moons, possibly. But I think you
Right.
also have to think about how dark is it really out there. The fish are only can feed so much depth for light
Right.
purposes.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
there's a lot to be like contradicting itself
It's
here, and
non-conclusive, it sounds like.
yeah, and you can't extrapolate this over a lot of data. Like they took this over 6 months or so, multiple lunar cycles, and this is the data they came up
Small
with,
correlations,
tracking them every day,
every
every
movement.
day. So they took so many data points, and to be able to say that the moon phase they couldn't find much correlation at
Yeah.
all is crazy
Yeah.
to
I mean,
me.
it's wild. I
With
mean,
how much you hear people talk about it around the
yeah.
spawn, especially.
I mean, every monthly edition of Bassmaster magazine has almost an entire page dedicated to the lunar table.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've looked at it, and I don't feel like it has ever made a significant correlation. And for anybody who's interested, I think it's worth pointing out that we've kind of collected our own data as it
Mm-hmm.
relates to both things that we're talking about today, the moon and pressure, over the 2023 season. So not last year, but the year before. Every time that either I was out by myself with someone else or with Sam, I would document what the pressure was and what the moon phase was. And it's not super clear data because I did not fish every moon phase equally like your study did,
Right.
right? And there was really no significant correlation, enough to say that I like, you ought to be fishing at a particular moon phase necessarily,
Right.
So
I think that's partially, the depth of our lakes, and how much, that moon phase gravitational pull can actually affect your lake, because they say like the Cisco, like they found that it has a pretty strong
that's got
correlation
to be
with
tidal.
moving the bait, fish up
Yeah.
and down in the water
Yeah.
column. So I think there is something to be said that the moon phase could have an effect, but I think it plays less and less into our fish that we're trying to target.
Well, and I'm going to get into this kind of with pressure, but I wonder how much the moon phase actually matters to bass
Mm-hmm.
versus it impacting the bass's forage,
Right.
which is I'm inclined to believe that it might have a greater effect on the phytoplankton
Right.
and subsequently the
Yeah.
crayfish, and
Yeah.
shad.
Right.
That's what I would think, but
I mean, yeah, bass got to eat. They got to follow the food.
yeah.
So wherever that's going, they're going to.
So long story short, are you
Yeah,
pretty much
I'm
wrapped up?
good.
So long story short, with the moon phase, it sounds like if you're going to be nighttime fishing, and this is supported by the other studies that we've done, you obviously want to be in the biggest moon that you can. So
Right.
full moon is how, if you're going to be fishing in low light. Other than that, if you want or are considering fishing, or maybe torn between fishing shallow or deep on a given day,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
looking into the moon phase can maybe aid you in making that decision.
Yeah. For a very limited amount of data, and a limited time frame, sure, it could potentially help.
Sure.
But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting enough. So maybe don't care about the moon as much as people think.
I 100% agree, and
Okay.
you'll find that in, um, you know, I was looking at End Fisherman, because
Yeah.
they have a
All kinds of
bunch, a
studies.
bunch of
Oh
stuff
yeah.
already done.
Oh yeah.
There's some good stuff from End Fisherman, some that is just filler in there,
Uh-huh.
but they were just putting some filler in there, and they're like, some of your best fishermen will swear by the moon phase, and some of them will be like, that is
The dumbest thing.
doesn't matter at all, and
Yeah.
it just makes you think like it obviously
It does
that
not.
guy's a pro and this guy's a pro and that guy doesn't care about it and this guy does care about
Yeah.
it, and I mean it's
If there
really hard to
was
say.
scientifically collectible data that proved a significant or noteworthy correlation, it would probably exist.
Yeah, yeah,
And it doesn't, it
yeah,
sounds like.
yeah.
So,
It doesn't, and this was our most recent study. Now I think it
yeah.
was like 2008 or
Yeah.
something. So
It doesn't correlate beyond the visual aspect of it because there is significant correlations from our vision episode that does talk about a moon correlation. But
right,
in terms of gravity or anything like that. No.
Yeah,
Sounds like
yeah,
nothing.
yeah. I think
Okay.
it's all about
All
vision.
about lighting.
Uh-huh.
All right. Well, that makes sense. Okay. Well, on to pressure. So, likewise, a very contentious topic that you have pros on one end saying that it matters, and you have pros on the other end that says it doesn't matter. I think that it does, but probably not for the reasons that we might think. So, barometric pressure, just FYI, is the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on Earth's surface, and that can fluctuate due to given weather patterns. So, a low pressure system is going to be a storm, rain, snow, often followed by high winds, or winds will actually probably occur before, and then high pressure will be that bright bluebird sky days that often are you can see after like a big storm.
Right.
So these fluctuations can and have scientifically proven to affect underwater aquatic environments and they influence fish behavior in several ways. Um, I mean, most, if not, well, most fish, I would say, not all, but most fish, including largemouth bass, have what's called a swim bladder in them, which is a gas
Yep.
filled organ that helps them maintain buoyancy in the water column. If you're a fisherman, there's definitely been a point in your time where you've caught a fish, likely out of deeper water. You go to throw it back and it turns belly up. That's because there is a disorientation in the fish's swim bladder that is causing it to roll over. So it does matter that the pressure of the water and the pressure that's being exerted on the fish does matter. Um, and people theorize that changes in barometric pressure can impact that swim bladder.
Okay.
And kind of what people think is like, oh, it can make them uncomfortable or make them less willing to eat and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, long story short, that is inconclusive, and actually more than inconclusive. The research that I studied kind of suggests the opposite, and I had never really thought of it this way, but the amount, without getting into the numbers of it, the amount of pressure that a fish can feel from the atmosphere when it is underwater is minimal.
Okay.
But you have to think about the pressure that the fish feels from the water, which is much greater than any pressure it would feel from air pressing down on the surface of the lake,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
People get so twisted up in thinking about, well, gosh, this zero point 0 Hg, increase of barometric pressure might really make a difference. Well, think about how much pressure difference occurs on a bass's body when it swims from 10 feet to 11 feet, right? That's a significant
That's a
amount
good point. You
of
ever
pressure.
dove down in a pool and tried to touch
That
10 foot at the bottom? Your ears are
your
trying to
ears are
kill you.
popping, exactly right. And you think about scuba diving or snorkeling or being down, as a human, you can feel foot by foot, you can feel that pressure in something like your ears.
Yeah.
So to me, that kind of shows, hey, pressure in terms of the fish feeling the physical implications of the weather changing is probably small, if not non-existent. Because a fish, as we can see from live scope, or you just can see with your eyes, I mean, a fish will come out of 15 feet of water to hit a topwater lure
Yeah.
in a half a second. And so if the science suggested that, wow, fish are really ticky tacky about the pressure on their body, it's just not, it's not true. It's
Yeah.
not true, right?
Okay.
Now, what is interesting that atmospheric pressure does impact is everything else in the lake, right? Everything in the water in our lakes sinks, suspends, or floats. And I'm talking sediment, moss, phytoplankton. There's always something in your water, right?
Uh-huh.
And when you get into very fine and small particulates, that pressure can have a significant impact on whether or not things like that are sinking to the bottom or are floating, right? Which in turn impacts your phytoplankton activity, which in turn affects your crawfish activity, your shad activity, and ultimately it's a chain reaction.
Yeah.
It's a chain reaction,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going through all of this information that I have here. Um, Yeah, one hypothesis is that the change in barometric pressure may indirectly affect largemouth bass by altering the behavior of their prey. For instance, a drop in pressure, albeit even small, can cause tiny particles of sediment and other material to float up off the bottom or rise higher in the water column. This, in turn, can affect the distribution behavior of zooplankton or phytoplankton, the base of the aquatic food web. And these tiny organisms may be pushed out of their comfort zones by the pressure change, sparking a feeding chain reaction amongst bait fish, which ultimately attracts predatory bass.
Very interesting.
Right. It's not it does make a difference, but not in the ways that we thought it might. Now, after looking far and wide for how pressure impacts bass and not finding much, decided, hey, let's actually research specific prey, like the impact of on shad. And I actually did specific research on threadfin shad, gizzard shad, and crawfish um, species or subspecies that are found in Missouri or the Midwest, really. And it's exactly the same. The changes in barometric pressure affect that distribution of the plankton in the water, which can affect that food web. Rapid drops in barometric pressure often precede cold fronts, okay,
Yeah.
which can cause sudden decreases in water temperature, which can stress threadfin and gizzard shad and make them more susceptible to predation. There was an independent study that supports this. There was a study conducted in 2023 from the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, their environmental studies program by a guy named Ethan Lang. His study was titled Analyzing the Effects of Cold Frontal Passage on the Feeding Habitats of Largemouth Bass. All right. And what he did is he went out to this lake, Red Cedar Lake, which is, I guess, 35 miles north of Lincoln, Nebraska. Before they started collecting any data as it related to what was happening with fish, they would record through a researcher used weather modeling software from the College of DuPage. Um, they would predict the formation and movement of what they called the cold front boundary line. Um, what they would then do next is they would go into the lake and essentially they would fish. And what's interesting is during these times when they anticipated a front moving in, so prefrontal, during the front, and postfrontal, they would fish with lures, only lures that imitated bait fish, such as threadfin shad or bluegill.
Okay.
And these baits were chosen to try and isolate only the fish that were actively chasing and feeding on bait fish. The thought process here is
Okay.
that even during inactive feeding periods, largemouth bass will still eat smaller forage, such as crayfish, simply because uh, they find it. Wait, simply because they find it to be a threat. Oh, so they'll eat it out of
Right. Just
defensive.
yeah.
Bass typically will feed on the larger, more mobile bait fish, specifically when they are in an active feeding period.
Right.
What all of this found is that through all of this study, there was an overarching, crystal clear conclusion that there is definitely uh, a passage of a cold front system affects bass in the way that they feed. In all cases of the study, the cold front entailed a period of time with lowering atmospheric pressure, followed by an increase in wind and change in wind direction. And during all of the postfrontal data collection, it was also noticed that the largemouth bass were biting lures with much less lower aggression and strength. So I'm kind of going on, but in conclusion, the data shows that a passing of a cold front definitely takes a detriment to the way largemouth bass feed.
Okay.
Upon the passage of a cold front, the level of feeding activity dropped significantly, and even on days where stronger cold fronts occurred, their feeding activity seemed to be non existent. So, what this tells us is that I don't think it is because of pressure itself, but the using and understanding frontal systems can help us understand when bass might be more active.
No, I think that's very, very fair statement right there. I think that's, how the pros make such good decisions on how they move and when they move. Because I think a lot of that ties into that and how they, like, if you've ever, like, listened to a pro speak on, like, how they're watching the weather,
Yeah.
it's like they have so many different weather apps. They're like
Oh yeah.
to the max, like wind, when the wind's going to
Yep.
change, all these different things, and all of that's playing into this, in the end,
Well,
right?
100%. And so here's kind of how it works is, to simplify things, I guess, is that pressure change is an indicator of a front.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And fronts impact fish in a number of ways, mostly because of wind and because of lighting. A low pressure system is going to be preceded by large amounts of wind, which is good for fishing. We talked about that with our vision
yeah,
episode.
yeah,
It gets the phytoplankton and the zooplankton moving, causes that chain reaction.
yeah.
Fronts are good because of storms. It decreases the lighting level, which, as we know, means that bass take advantage of the fact that they have better vision than their prey, and
They're
it makes
fishing in the
them
rain.
fishing in the rain. It makes them more willing to go
Yeah,
out. And higher pressure are those slick, calm, well lit days that bass can be more sensitive to.
yeah.
So when you're looking at pressure, it's not oh, hey, the fish are going to be slowed down or sluggish because they can feel the
Right,
barometer
right.
changing in their air bladder or their swim bladder. It's not that. It's truly just following the weather very closely.
Yeah,
And it's the science is clear that it makes a big difference in that regard. Kind of side tangent, which I thought was interesting. There was a study that was done about people trying to catch crawfish, and during a falling barometer, prefrontal,
yeah.
the crawfish are significantly more active.
So that's why prefrontal conditions can be
It
so
just goes to show that a
right.
prefrontal condition can set that chain of reaction, that chain reaction off, and that everything starts scrambling.
Right. And then the post frontal conditions, things are starting to calm
Things
back
tighten back up.
down, trying to figure out,
Yeah. And I
all
mean,
those things.
Sam and I can remember, very specifically, we were in a tournament and we were following the pressure to a T that day. And we had been looking at it the
Yeah.
days leading
And
up.
that's yeah.
And I had that, I think the night before or the morning of, I looked at it and I said, Sam, there is going to be a huge pressure swing at this time. We ought to go to our best spot at the beginning of that swing. And we did. And it was the best day we've ever had out on the lake.
Yeah.
We caught over 20 pounds and won the tournament. It was
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
Now, looking back on that, the wind picked up and the clouds moved in, right? And I think
Right.
that's what cued that all off. It has nothing to do with what the fish feel. So,
Yeah.
all this to say, you should be following the barometer. You really should. But not as a way of understanding how the swim bladder works and that the fish might not feel well or they might be lethargic. No, it has everything to do with
Yeah.
wind, lighting, and shading. It has everything to do with that. Nothing to do with what the fish actually feel inside of them. So
Just gives you a little jump on things that could be coming, and allows you to position yourself in a good place
absolutely,
to maximize your day on the water.
absolutely, absolutely. And I've got a tournament tomorrow. You've got a big trip coming up.
Yeah.
I absolutely am going to be looking at pressure tomorrow and thinking about wind and positioning and everything like that. So,
Right. I mean, it's all these things that come into you making a good decision or a poor decision and changing a
yep,
tournament for you.
yep, yep.
Right. And that's why Jacob Wheeler is as good as he is because he makes good decisions all the time.
No kidding. No
Yeah.
kidding. So, definitely a shorter episode today. But thesis of the episode, don't care about the moon that much.
Yeah.
And you should care about the barometer, but you should care about it only in how it affects your weather patterns.
Yeah.
Pay attention to wind, pay attention to those front, and also pay attention to temperature. You get a cold front coming in,
Yeah.
it's not going to be a tough day.
Yeah.
So nothing that's too groundbreaking, but it helps us understand the why behind a lot of this, because I knew pressure mattered, but I didn't know why.
Yeah. And I always thought moon phase, like, every year we'd go to Lake Fork to fish. We're like, oh, the moon's gonna be
Oh, full
perfect.
moon, yeah.
Thank goodness, they're gonna move. No,
Terrible.
no. Let me
Terrible.
tell you, Lake
No
Fork
correlation.
is a tough lake to
No
fish.
kidding. And
So
moon's not making anything different about that.
yeah, we wish the moon was helping, but it wasn't. But
Alrighty.
yeah,
I guess that's a wrap on barometer and moon phase.
see you next time.
Later.